Hi, it's been a while. It's Jack Kim and welcome back to my channel. As you can tell from the title below, today I'll be doing a paper 2 practice exam about economic development, and today I'll be talking specifically about the different policies that the government uses to promote economic development. To start off with, so I came up with an article, and these would be the different parts of the article, the main points. As I've said previously in another paper 2 practice exam, when you're doing paper 2, it is important for you guys to make your entire article to look like different bullet points. So it would have to look like this, and it would have to look like there's different main points within the article. If you do this, it's really beneficial for the later questions. I'll show it to you guys later, but first of all, these are the main points of the article that I've created. So first of all, the Brazil wants to increase infrastructure, and that is because they want to increase the global competitiveness. So when they're exporting, more people will be buying their goods because of the superior quality. So that's what they're aiming for. And in order to reach that, they're trying to increase the number of jobs, and they want to educate the workforces to increase and improve the quality of the human capital. And next, they're doing power plant construction, tax incentives for infant industry. So once again, they're trying to stimulate the growth of the whole entire industry, and they're making tax cuts for infrastructure-related firms. So they're doing this in order to bolster these infrastructure-related firms to increase the amount of production of infrastructure-related goods and services in order to, of course, make economic development. And next up, because of these different policies, in the article it's saying that there's a huge inflation. Also, in order to further bolster the overall economic growth and development, the Brazilian government is trying to employ the use of this microcredit policy. And lastly, they're increasing the trade protection for infant industries to grow into a significant size so that they have global competitiveness. Okay, so I'll let you guys read this for a moment. Okay, so as you can see in the article, it is packed with different policies that the Brazilian government is going to use to have economic development. Okay, now I'll be moving on to the questions, and I'll move on to answering the questions themselves. Alright, so here are the questions. So the first two, as you can see, it says define infrastructure. The next one is define microcredit. These each are 2 points. B, you have to use supply and demand diagram to explain the effects on the fuel market if there's a decrease in fuel subsidy. So within the article, one of the bullet points is that fuel subsidy will decrease. The question is trying to ask you what its effect is on the fuel market. Number C, you have to use the PPC and you have to explain how infrastructure project would impact production possibilities. So for both B and C, these are 4-point questions. You have to accurately draw a diagram, and then you have to explain it well in order to get the full 4 marks. Lastly, for D, using text or data and your own knowledge, you have to discuss the impacts of market-oriented and interventionist policies on Brazil's early economic development. Okay, so as you can see, for D, there's a point allocation of 8 points. So A is 2, B, C is 4, and lastly D is 8 points. So D is the most important part out of the 4 questions, and it is the one that you have to write as if you're writing a paper 1 question. Okay, I think that's it. I'll move on to actually answering this question. Now pause the video right here if you're going to actually solve the question, and please do so to the best of your abilities, and then I'll come back and explain the questions and answers for you. Alright, so let's start off with the definition question. So AI, infrastructure, is numerous types of physical capital resulting from investments which will lead to economic development and economic growth. Now you also have to give some examples of infrastructure. So here you can write about telecommunication, telecommunication, sewage system, or transportation. But it's best to give an example to show that you actually know what infrastructure is. And for A2, you have to define microcredit. So microcredit is a loaning system where you give out small loans at once. And these are usually for individuals that don't have access to other types of credits. So these are usually employed in developing countries or like less developed countries because people are unable to repay the credit that they actually receive. So that is why they're trying to give little microcredits, like small loans, that is repayable over time. Okay, let's look at B now. So first of all, of course, you have to draw an accurate diagram of the situation that the question has imposed to you. So the question is talking about the decrease in fuel subsidy. Now, if you think about it, if there's a decrease in subsidy, that means supply would decrease. So in the graph, you will have to draw a decrease in supply. Don't forget your arrows, and don't forget the equilibrium points that you have to put. And lastly, don't forget about the axes, price and quantity. And of course, you have to label the curves. So once you're done with that, you can move on to actually explaining what's happening with the graph. So you start with saying that the fuel subsidy has decreased, and you can go straight away and talk about how S1 would shift to S2 to the leftwards, and that is an indication of a decrease in supply. And you have to explain why that happens. So when there's a decrease in subsidy, there's less producers that are willing and able to produce the fuel at a given price. So that is why supply would decrease. So that's the reason for 2. And afterwards, you have to explain the actual phenomenon and its impact on the market. So number 4, as you can see, you'll have to be able to talk about that the equilibrium shifts from this point to this point, and you will have to describe the points by talking about the quantity and the price. So first, the initial market equilibrium used to be Q1, P1, but you have to say that it shifts to Q2, P2. And after that, you have to explicitly state that quantity decreased and price increased due to the decrease in fuel subsidy. And that's the impact on the overall fuel market. Alright, let's move on to problem C. So problem C is asking about if there is an infrastructure project, what is going to be the change in the production possibility, and you have to use a PPC curve. Now, if you haven't forgotten yet, this is how a PPC curve is supposed to look like. So here on the axes, you have to write good A, good B, or you can write capital goods, consumer goods. It doesn't really matter. You just have to say, you just have to be comparing 2 different types of goods. And when you're, after you label the axes, you have to draw this curved PPC curve. You cannot draw a straight PPC curve because of the opportunity cost that is involved in, PPC curve. So, what is it? So for the first curved PPC curve, you would have to label it PPC1. And since this is an economic growth and development, you have to shift the PPC curve to the right to PPC2. And you need these arrows, of course. And when it comes down to explaining this phenomenon, you have to first state what is happening. You have to give an answer that if you're investing in infrastructure, production possibility would increase. So you start off with that, then you start explaining why. So number 2, so you have to say that firms an increase in efficiency, perhaps in the delivery system. And delivery system is part of infrastructure, and you start off here and you explain why an increase in efficiency of a delivery system can bring economic growth or economic development. Okay, so in 3, you have to explain why there is an increase in efficiency. So the increase in the quality of boats and trains or any transportation systems related with the good and service, it would transport more goods in a shorter amount of time. So the rate of transporting these goods actually increase. So that's, in other words, an increase in efficiency. So that would lead to this, where you have to say an increase in efficiency would decrease the cost of production because everything is done quicker and it's done cheaper. So so there's a decrease in cost of production. And because there's a decrease in cost of production, firms have a larger budget to be able to be used in different areas. And if they do invest in different areas, they increase in productivity because they're capable of improving their capitals in different areas, human, physical, etc., etc. Of course, if productivity increases, the output would increase, and the PPC1 would shift to PPC2. So this is the entire steps that you have to explain for problem C. Alright, for last question, number D. So before you even answer the questions and you start explaining all the different parts, of course you have to give a definition for market-oriented policy and interventionist policy. The reason why you have to give the definitions is because in different mark schemes for paper 2, a lot of them asks you for the definition of the important words in the question. So it's good for you to define major words, especially for question D, because it highly resembles paper 1. So now you have to define market-oriented policy and interventionist policy. So market-oriented policy, you can define it this way. So you'd say supply-side policy using methods of market reforms, encouraging competition, or changing incentive of stakeholders. So market-oriented policies, they change the supply curve through these 3 methods. So remember that. And for interventionist policy, this is a supply-side policy using the method of investment into land, labor, and human capital. So interventionist policy is technically the government expenditure. It's kind of like fiscal policy, but it is labeling it to be supply-side impacting. So fiscal policy is demand-side impacting, but when it comes down to supply-side, we call it interventionist policy. Wonderful. Now I'll be moving into the actual discussion part of this essay. So when it comes down to answering this question, you have to talk about the advantages and the possible drawbacks of market-oriented policy and interventionist policy, and in the end, you have to weigh the which policy would be better, or you could give an alternate policy, etc., etc. Anyhow, right now, you would have to write about the market-oriented policy's advantage and disadvantage. So, for advantage, the market-oriented policy is essentially trying to reduce red tape, and it's trying to increase tax incentives. So, this means that firms can act more freely. So the decrease in red tape also means a decrease in regulation for firms. So there are different there's less rules that the firms have to conform to. That means firms can act more freely, of course. And this also means that more people would become more creative, and they would be creating a lot of different types of firms. So the competition would naturally increase, and that would push and encourage people to, or firms to become increasingly efficient through research and development. So this is a positivity, it's an advantage of market-oriented policy. So out of 3 different methods, they're trying to encourage competition between firms so that they can increase in efficiency. Now there are disadvantages to these policies. So of course there are firms that would become efficient and they would evolve through competition. However, there are businesses that would be running out because of the increase in competition. If you think about it, like little infant firms that lack of economies of scale, and if they're battling against these larger firms, they would run out of business because they're at a point of disadvantage. Also, this may increase inequality because of the fact that the chance is given equally for all the different firms. And all the different firms, there are stronger ones and there are weaker ones. And they're given same amount of opportunities and chances. And larger firms would be more capable of utilizing and maximizing the chance that they're given. So this may increase the inequality of chance between the larger firms and the smaller firms. So that's it for market-oriented policy. Now I'll be moving on to the interventionist policy. So next up is interventionist policy, its advantages and disadvantages. So the advantages of interventionist policy is that it would easily increase efficiency because it directly impacts the different capitals of land, labor, physical, and human capital. So it directly impacts it. So there's a great chance of the increase in efficiency for the different firms within an industry. And if efficiency is achieved, the economies of scale would happen. So there's an increase of chance for economies of scale. And due to the interventionist policy, for these different reasons, in the short run, the SRAs would increase or shift to the right, and economic growth may be achieved, and there's a decrease in inflation. Also, in the long run, the LRAs will shift to the right, so the production potential would increase. So that also means that the amount of output that has to be put out to the market is going to increase, and firms would have to employ more people, so employment would increase. And that means more income for individuals, and that is an increase in purchasing power because they have more money. And if they have an increase in purchasing power, that means they can make more economic choices because they have more money. And if they have an increase in economic choices, that is a form of economic development because they have a wider range of choices that they can make. So, on top of the decrease in inflation, so a stabilization of the market, an increase in economic choice happens. So that is a major advantage for an interventionist policy. So a major disadvantage, though, for interventionist policy is that first, corruptions may occur. So corruptions may occur in any other types of policies. However, interventionist policies, these usually corrupt in a very easy way because lobbying and merging may happen between the firm and the government, and the firm may make a deal with the government to receive more support than the other firms. And the government officials may agree upon that, and that may occur in a form of corruption. And it may be poorly planned. So interventionist policy, as I mentioned previously, it is a way of government expenditure into the land, labor, physical, human capital. So if there isn't a specific plan and it's just saying that we're going to use money, it's going to fail. That's why if it's poorly planned, there's a high chance of being poorly planned because people don't think about how they're going to actually invest into the capitals. So this is a major disadvantage. And lastly, it is not sustainable. Let's think about this. We know that fiscal policy is not sustainable because it is continuously using the government budget. It's the same thing for interventionist policy. The government has to keep on using their money out of their bank, out of their pocket. So they're using government budget to actually support the LLPH capitals. So if you think about it, if they keep on using this source of money, their budget, there would be budget deficits, and it's not going to be good for the overall economy of the country. That is why it is not sustainable. So this is really kind of a short-run project if you don't plan it out well. That's a major disadvantage when it comes down to interventionist policy. Okay, now I'll be moving on to the conclusion. Alright, the grand finale, the conclusion. So for the conclusion, you can talk about how both policies are very efficient and effective in actually achieving economic development. So both of them actually allow us to increase in international competitiveness because interventionist policy, it allows for a firm's capital to improve, and the market-oriented policy, it encourages the efficiency of the firms to increase. So either way, international competitiveness would increase, and that would result in economic growth, and that would increase the income of Brazil, national income of Brazil. And that also means that the standard of living would increase because people have more economic choices to make, and overall the equality would increase because more people would be employed, especially the people with lower income households. So economic growth would result in the increase in national health and education level. That would also bring on standard of living to be increasing or becoming better. And this would take form in the increase in the HDI, which includes the non-material forms of economic development. So, yes, this is how you're going to see it. However, in the conclusion, I personally think in the short run it is better to use interventionist, and in the long run it's better to use market-based. The reason is because interventionist policy is not the best policy to be used in the long run. So the reason behind why I say interventionist policy is more short run suited is because in the long run, if you think about it, if they use more money out of the government will have to borrow more money out of the central bank, and that means that there's going to be increase in demand for loanable funds, and et cetera, and that will lead to crowding out effect. So that is not good for the economy. So essentially, the interventionist policy is similar to the fiscal policy. Once again, it's affecting the supply side, and the crowding out effect is not preferable, especially in the long run. So in the short run, to get that effect of economic development and growth really quickly, interventionist policy is great. But you have to make a good mix of the interventionist policy with the market-based policy. Because market-based policy is more long run, because it's trying to encourage competition and let the market evolve on its own to the future. So that to the future means long run. So in the long run, market-based policy would be used so that the markets can evolve in its own. But for the quick impact that could affect in the short run, you may use the interventionist policy. So that's my conclusion. You may come out with a different conclusion, but it's best if you separate it by a short run, long run, and give that synthesis. Alright, on a finishing note, I didn't include any of the text within the essay because I was just putting it into bullet form. However, when you're actually writing the essay, it's best if you put quotes of the actual excerpts that you're going to reference to from the article. So, if you do that, that's it for today. Okay, thank you guys so much for watching this video. I'll come back again with another paper question with regards to other topics within economics. I hope you have noticed my new board. I hope you liked this video. If you did, please like and subscribe. Alright, thank you guys. I'll see you next time.